What if psychological projection was actually a good thing? Not something to poo poo, but an attempt by our insanely intelligent subconscious to find wholeness, to find healing, to find integration, to bring disparate parts of the self together. What if psychological projection was something that we might even celebrate rather than pathologize? I'm going to build a case for that today. This is another of Brent's musings. I'm a MFT and a Buddhist teacher, and these are little musings I am exploring, sharing with the world. I hope you enjoy them. A lot to unpack today. So the inspiration for this talk comes from my experiences in graduate school in psychology, and also my experience in a 4-year Buddhist teacher training through Spirit Rock and IMS. And in those containers, in those trainings, a large part of the training was dialogue, was group processing, processing with my fellow students and colleagues, and really in a group container grappling with ideas, grappling with various philosophical conundrums from the Buddhist tradition, from the Western psychological tradition. Oh, I see a squirrel back there. Hey, squirrel. Oh, there are two squirrels running around, maybe doing a mating dance. That was last talk, the mating dance. So if you didn't catch that one, Zen and the Art of Romantic Love, be sure to check that one out. A lot of insights there. But anyways, in these containers, we would engage in, what Socrates, the Socratic method, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So we would debate. And sometimes these debates would degenerate into arguments. And when they degenerated into arguments, one of the favorite insults to sling to the other side was, "You're projecting." As if, and the implicit message there that you're projecting was that you're doing something bad, you're doing something wrong. Because, part of that implicit message is if you're really a good psychology student or Buddhist student, you're not going to project. And I'm guilty of this as well. I was maybe one of the main culprits in those scenes of lobbing that one out to win an argument. You're projecting. And this is a coming to Jesus moment, maybe some redemption, paying the karmic debt of my past self. And so I'm sorry, fellow colleagues, for lobbing that one out there. And here's the redemption. It's never too late to find redemption. Okay, so a lot to unpack here. First, let's define projection. So projection is psychological projection. The basic idea here is that whatever is ego dystonic, meaning doesn't match my idea of who I am from an ego structure point of view, whatever I can't handle inside of this container that is Brent, I'm one of the ways I can deal with that is I can project it outward. I can, if it's too intense to be in here, I can put it outside of myself. And in doing so, I can still have a relationship to it, but it isn't so intense because it's inside. It's out there. Classic objects of projection are other human beings, but definitely not limited to that. We human beings are projection machines. We'll project on just about anything. It can project on this cup of coffee, that this cup of coffee will make this talk go a little better. Because, and there might be some truth to that, but I am maybe projecting a little bit of a rescuer onto this cup of coffee. Classic psychological test for this that shows one the nature of the projecting psyche is the Rorschach test, the ink blot test. It reminds me of a funny joke. Well, it's funny to me. Patient goes in, see the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist gives him an ink blot test. And these ink blot tests, they're designed to, by very meticulously designed to represent absolutely nothing. There are just random ink blots, but it's a blank slate for the psyche to project upon. And the questioning to give these ink blot tests, the psychiatrists or the psychologists are trained to say a very specific phrase. And the specific phrase is, what might this be, as they hold up the inkblot test. And it's designed so they don't lead the witness. So it's just, what might this be? And so anyway, back to the joke. The guy who is doing the inkblot tests gets the results back, and the results aren't pretty. And the patient hears the results, and then he says to the psychiatrist, "What do you mean, doc? You're the guy showing me the dirty pictures." Uh, I hope it's not just me. I think that's hilarious. All right, so we're projection machines. We typically project on other human beings, but we can project on random ink blots. We can project on cups of coffee. Astrology, in some ways, is the ancient ink blot test. So ancient humans looked up at the skies and saw these random constellations, and that was a nice blank slate to project the inner world upon. And in some ways, I'm saying like astrology, there's a lot of truth to it because the truth of the human psyche is projected on these constellations, on these stars. I'm not really saying, well, I have another joke for that one. I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Sagittarius, and we're skeptical. So, anyways, the blank slate that is the constellations at night, it's a great inkblot test. It's a great Rorschach test. You can learn a lot about the human psyche by what ancient humans and modern humans project upon the psyche. You have Mars, the god of war, which is kind of a representation of the inner aggression. You have Venus, the god of love, goddess of love, projection of our romantic capacity, and on and on and on, which is real. There is reality to that. Whether or not the gravitational pull of planets has any effect on my psychology, I'm a little skeptical of that piece, but I'm not skeptical about the human psyche being projected upon a blank slate. A lot of reality to that. Other typical objects of projection, places, like, for example, I think in the American mind, maybe Hawaii gets the biggest projections of any place in the world. Hawaii is paradise. I just spent many years in Hawaii, and I can tell you that while Hawaii has very good elements, it is not paradise because human beings bring their problems with them to Hawaii. Um, what else? Another very common place of projection these days in spiritual scenes is on psychedelic drugs. So, especially exotic ones. So, maybe ayahuasca is going to save me. She is the great mother that I never had, that is going to take care of all my problems, wrap me up in a psychedelic blanket, and all of my problems will go away forever, and life will be nothing but a walk in a psychedelic park of love. So that's a projection, projecting one's own unfinished business, complexes, needs upon a substance. Institutions, definitely a place of projection. So, alma mater, which is what people call their university. That's Latin for great mother. So, same idea. People might project their own need for all loving, all supportive mother upon a university, and then the university might even try to run with that projection and then create a womb-like experience for their students of safe spaces and trigger warnings and every need being met and every complaint being met with all loving, altruistic compassion. Um, Political figures, other places of intense projection. So in America right now, we've got a strongman president, and that's an archetype. If someone is feeling weak in their lives, well, daddy with a big stick, he's going to come in and solve all the problems. He's going to take care of all those bad people. And let's go because daddy is here to clean house. Another huge projection. Maybe, for the most of civilization, the royal family was this place of projection too. The king, the queen, kind of holds a big projection of the psyche for the people. Interesting phrase in the UK, maybe just England. The king is dead, long live the king. Or the queen is dead, long live the queen. So what does that mean? So the queen is dead, long live the queen. So one might get from that the archetype of the queen is eternal. It is inhabited for a brief time by a human being, which is finite. So the human being inhabits the archetype, holds the projection, and then dies, but the archetype itself lives on. Because the archetype is part of the very fabric of our psyche from a Jungian standpoint. Okay, so why is projection considered an insult in certain scenes where in Buddhist and psychological scenes, there's a subtle competition going on there of who is the most spiritual, who is the most awake. And the idea there is that if you're projecting, you're losing in that game because that's an act of untutored worldlings in Buddhist language. So where does that idea come from? And I have a hypothesis that it comes from Freud. So one can trace that negative aspect of projection back to Freud. And D.H. Lawrence wrote a little critique on the Freudian idea of the unconscious. And D.H. Lawrence wrote, "The Freudian unconscious is the cellar in which the mind keeps its bastard spawn." The Freudian unconscious is the cellar in which the mind keeps its bastard spawn. So that was D.H. Lawrence critiquing the Freudian unconscious. In a previous video, I talked about the negativity bias, the human tendency to view the world through what's wrong that has evolved. It's part of our evolution. It's evolutionarily advantageous because if we're primed to see what's wrong, then we're more ready for potential threat. So this Freudian idea of the unconscious is that that's what I suppress is mostly negative. It's, from a Freudian model, it's usually devious sexual impulses, incestuous sexual impulses from child to parent, parent to child. That's a main part of what is suppressed. And violent impulses, impulses towards aggression and revenge. And, there's a lot of truth to that. If you look at the neuroscience of the brain, we have circuits for rage and we have circuits for sexual impulses, and they're right next to each other. And all you got to do is tickle it with an electrode, and those circuits will wake up, and, violence and devious sexual encounters will ensue. And everyone's got that circuitry. So Freud was right. But he was only looking at half of the picture. D.H. Lawrence goes on to write, the true unconscious is the wellhead, the fountain of real motivity. In other words, yes, the unconscious holds all of the blood drinking lizards of the id, the things we suppress so that civilization doesn't fall apart. Yes, it's got that. And it's the wellspring of creativity, of love, of altruism, of compassion, of creativity, our own goodness, our own power, our own charisma, our own capacity for greatness. That's in the subconscious as well. And to get a full picture of the subconscious, the unconscious, I think one needs to go to Jung, because Freud only had half. Jung brought in the other side. So let's get into that a bit. So Jung's idea of the unconscious was that, or just the self with a capital S, is that our inner life is structured around dynamic opposites, what he called the bipolar nature of the psyche, or complementarities. And there's really a neuroscience backed, Jung mapped this out before the modern neuroscience, but the modern neuroscience is really, confirming this idea of the bipolar nature of the psyche. And the main neuroscience on this is that the two hemispheres of the brain. So the left hemisphere of the brain, that is the aspect of the brain that's in charge of language, linear reasoning, detail orientation, ego maintenance, and creation of a narrative self. That's the left side of the brain. The right side of our brain is in charge of emotional tone, nonverbal processing, metaphor, intuition, body awareness, lived embodied relational and unconscious aspects of experience. So there's some very fascinating research that's been done on people that have the left-right hemisphere of their brains severed. And this used to be a fairly common procedure with people with grand mal seizures. Because with grand mal seizures, a seizure would start on one side of the brain and then travel to the other side. But if you cut the corpus callosum, which is these various neurological fibers that connect the two sides of the brain, if you cut that, then the seizure will only stay on one side of the brain, potentially saving the life of the patient. So, with people that had these procedures done, they did a lot of experiments on them. And what's kind of trippy is that, the researcher can stand here, and, the left side of the brain innervates the right eye, and the right side of the brain innervates the left eye. So the researcher could stand over here and dialogue with what would that be, the right brain, and then walk over here and dialogue with the left brain. Trippy. And these two sides of the brain weren't talking to each other at all. There was no communication. So a trippy thing would be like this side of the brain is religious and this one's an atheist. This one is very aggressive, a mean motherfucker, and this one's a pacifist. This one's Gandhi. It's trippy. People with extreme trauma manifest this as well. It's known as, used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now it's called dissociative identity disorder. that there will be literally aspects of self, subpersonalities, that are not aware of each other at all. The psyche is split or shattered in a DID, or yeah. So Jung's notion of psychological health is very interesting, that psychological suffering, neuroses, and existential suffering arise out of splitting, out of different aspects of the psyche not talking to each other, not being integrated, being split apart, not in a dynamic equilibrium, a dynamic dance of polarity. So, from a Jungian standpoint, the classic polarities or complementarities are what is conscious and what is unconscious. So, the conscious self and the unconscious self. So, you could even think of that as the right brain and the left brain. Another one would be the persona and the shadow. So, persona is Latin for mask. It is what we present to the world. It is, usually formed in our childhood, what we had to be to fit into our family of origin and not be rejected, to find love. But then we have our shadow, which is all of the things that we suppress in ourselves, all the things that we're not aware of, all of the gnarly things that come out when, I don't know, people get too tired and too drunk, and then just the shadow comes out. Another one would be what is manifest and what is latent in the psyche. And another very important one from a Jungian standpoint would be the masculine and the feminine, what Jung called the anima and the animus. This is a very progressive idea from Jung. This came in the 1920s, but it is very progressive that within every person is the masculine and the feminine. That we have aspects of ourselves, in Jung's definition, a masculine would be the logos, that which is rational, that which is logic, that which is linear, lines up with like left brain. And then we also have the feminine aspect, what Jung called eros, or the erotic, the relational, the intuitive, the what's called the gestalt, seeing the big picture. That within every human are these aspects. And if they are not balanced, if they are not harmonized, that is the model for psychopathology or polarization. When these parts are out of whack, when they're not harmonized in a coherent system, that is the birth of pathology. Another important idea with Jung's map is this idea of compensation, is that when these things are out of whack, when there's polarization in the psyche, then the subconscious will start secreting phenomenon to try to get equilibrium back. And one of the things the subconscious secretes is projection. Another thing it does is dreams. Another thing it does is synchronicities, these seemingly, what's the word? Random acts that aren't so random because the subconscious is, it's real when they say the conscious mind's the tip of the iceberg. Subconscious is really driving the bus. Mm. So, what are some examples of polarization when two aspects of the psyche are really split, really not talking to each other? So, classic one would be, the Catholic priest who claims celibacy, but in the shadows is far from celibate. And another one would be, well, The Republican Party in America is known for being quite homophobic at times. Not all the times, but sometimes. And there's a common phenomenon when the Republican National Convention is in town. The gay dating app Grindr usually breaks because there are so many users. Um, Another one in that, there's another funny research or fascinating research that you give men questionnaires. They fill out the questionnaires, and these questionnaires are designed to see how homophobic they are. And then you hook the electrodes up to their penis to measure blood flow. And then you show them gay porn. And guess what? Guess who gets the largest erections watching gay porn? The most homophobic. Wow. Big surprise. So if this compensation, if one aspect of self is really not in touch with another aspect of self, it takes a lot of energy to keep that other part suppressed or in the shadows or in the latent. So the manifest is doing a lot of work to keep the latent in the shadow at bay. Um, All right. So why would projection be a good thing? So as I mentioned earlier, we don't just suppress our blood drinking Freudian lizards in the basement. We also suppress our goodness. So what Jungian analyst Robert Johnson called the inner gold. We suppress the positive qualities, the precious qualities within ourselves. We suppress our greatest talents, our virtues, our potentials, our charisma, and these aspects of self are highly charged with psychic energy or libido. And then we project them outward in positive projections. And in some ways, the negative projections are the low-hanging fruit, because the positive projections are usually what people are least in touch with. And why would someone, you know, so say a woman is kind of cut off from her own agency and power and sexuality and just charisma. Why would she be obsessed with Taylor Swift? Why would she give Taylor Swift all of that? Well, because if she owned that, her life would have to drastically change. Why would a working class, you know, forgotten man in his 20s, covered in Cheeto dust in the basement, smoking bong rips, why would he give Donald Trump all of his power, all of his potential for greatness, all of his potential for agency? Why would he project that onto Donald Trump? Well, because if he owned it, he'd have to get out of mom's basement, out of that womb, out of that safe space of not being anyone. He would have to become someone. So there's lots of reasons for not owning our inner gold. So I'm just going to go through a few that I wrote down. So one would be fear of responsibility. This reminds me of fear of existential responsibility. So there's a old 90s movie. I'm dating myself, but called Wayne's World. Genius movie. So in the movie, there's a character called Garth, and Garth says to Wayne, "I'd like to boldly go where no man has gone before, but I'll probably never leave Aurora." And Aurora is like the suburban Michigan kind of womb that he's very acclimated to. So, in other words, I'd like to own my power, but I'm really safe here in the suburbs, just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So to own our gold would mean it would shake that up and face us with the daunting task of living up to these newly integrated powers and responsibilities. Another reason is owning our inner gold. That would be a threat to the established identity, our ego stability. A lot of people have a ego structure built on a victim narrative of the world has done harm to me or wronged me in some way. Um, and even these victim narratives, even though they can be excruciatingly painful, they provide stability. They provide, I know who I am. If I didn't have this idea of who I am, I don't know who I would be. And that can be existentially terrifying to not know who you are. And people will cling to the life raft or the scratchy blanket of I am a piece of shit, because to let go of that blanket would be to, for a time, shake up your ego structure and really be in that numinous place in between knowing who you are and discovering a new self. Another very important piece here would be complementarity. So I want to share a little chart to describe this one. So I'm going to see if I can do this. So yeah, let's do it. Here we go. So this is a chart from the organic intelligence tradition, and this is a chart of arousal. And this sine wave here, each where as it climbs, there is greater and greater and greater intensity. And these red and blue lines, these represent the complementarity of the psyche. So, so say you go owning your positive gold of, say, the warrior archetype. So the warrior archetype, the blue side of that, or the positive gold side of that, that would be empowerment. That would be the ability to say no, the ability to hold boundaries, the ability to go for what you want, come what may. What Peter Levine calls healthy aggression. Aggress is Latin for to move toward a goal. And say that this dotted line here is your current capacity for the warrior archetype or your own aggression. And above this dotted line is uncharted territory. So if you pop that threshold and enter into a new arena of arousal, the positive side, the gold of that's going to come through, but also the negative aspect, all of the shadow elements around anger. So as you pop into greater ability to hold boundaries and say no and go for what you want, the shadow side is going to come as well. And what's the shadow side of the warrior archetype? One's capacity for domination, for controlling others, for revenge, for violence. All of the things you haven't integrated, and that might freak you out, and rightly so. So as the gold comes through, so does the shadow. And that can be very ego dystonic for people. They don't want to become the perpetrators that victimize them. So much safer to, I don't know, project that warrior upon Arnold Schwarzenegger or Rambo, and let them hold let them hold that goodness and darkness, because it's too much for me to hold inside. So too, like, say this is one's capacity for love, for romance. Coming back to my last talk, so this is like the ceiling of romance. And if and one doesn't allow themselves to move into this greater level of arousal. So the positive side of love would be, the capacity for inspiration, being inspired by another, the butterflies in the stomach, all of the high highs. But if one allows themselves to love, they're also going to allow themselves to grieve. So the shadow side of love, or the lover archetype, would be addiction. Like, oh, I had her, but I lost her, and the pain of that, and the lamentation, and the loss, and I need her so much, and she's not here. So the gold is just eros, the shadow is addiction. And so some people are keeping themselves right there. You can keep that nice and suppressed so that, um, yeah, so that, things don't get too intense so that the shadow comes up. Okay. Um, Another reason people suppress their gold would be social acceptance. So a lot of family systems are built around people playing certain roles. And say in your family system, maybe your role was something like, I don't know, the peacemaker. Um, as the family system goes chaotic, the peacemaker comes in and kind of soothes everyone. And what if that peacemaker started integrating their aggression and their warrior, and they started saying, "No, I'm tired of doing that shit." Then that's going to throw that system into chaos, and the other members of that system are going to start saying, "No, get back in your peacemaker role." And so the peacemaker has a decision to make. Do they risk owning their power, or do owning their power and getting the boot from that system, which happens a lot, or do they keep their power squelched and keep the social cohesion alive and just project all of that power onto, I don't know, an Instagram influencer online that seems to travel the world with ease and gets whatever they want and takes no shit? These are big questions, and a lot of these questions are unfolding subconsciously. All right, so that's probably enough for one day. I just realized this is going to be a multi-part series. So if you made it this far, I really appreciate you listening. And if this talk has some resonance, please share it with your friends. And the way this channel is going to grow, I think, is mostly through word of mouth referrals. And if you're watching this on YouTube or Instagram, I like to dialogue. So leave a comment below and like and subscribe if that's what you want to do. And really appreciate you listening. Check out my website, brentmortonmft.com, for more updates and musings. And have a great day. It's Mother's Day, so gratitude to all the mothers out there, future, past, present. Take care.